Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Society of Schenectady. My name is, I just said that like it was a wrestling match, of Schenectady. What just happened? Sorry. My name is Robyn Salvin, she, her pronouns, please. And I will be helping to lead today's service alongside the Reverend Wendy Bartel. How about we just use Wendy's name since that's what fits best for Wendy, who will be exploring how we can take better care of ourselves with all that is going on in the world around us. We are so very glad that you decided to be with us today in person or in our Zoom sanctuary. Everyone is welcome to stay after the service for conversation and connection, either on Zoom or in the back of the Great Hall.
And now, let us settle more fully into our seats wherever we may be and receive the gift of our next breath. This precious gift of life that we've been given. Come, let us worship together.
Our reading this morning can be found in Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, Mapping Meaningful Connection and the Language of Human Experience. Brown is a social worker and research professor and quotes a lot of other people's work. This section starts with a quote from Dolly Parton in her song, I Will Always Love You. That quote is, "And I wish you joy and happiness, but above all of this, I wish you love." Brown then writes, quote, "When I hear that line, I immediately think of Dolly Parton, and I immediately feel Whitney Houston." In Dolly's gorgeous book, Songteller, she tells the story of Kevin Costner's office calling about using I Will Always Love You in a movie. Dolly had worked with the person who was doing the music for the film, liked him, and said yes. She writes, "But that was the last I'd heard of it. Then one day, I was driving my Cadillac back home to Brentwood from my office. I had the radio on, and all of a sudden, I heard the spoken voice say, 'If I should stay.' It caught my ear, but I didn't recognize it. Then it went into the music. I thought I was going to wreck the car. I have never had such an overwhelming feeling. I had to pull off to the side of the road because it just got bigger and bigger and bigger and better and better. I've never experienced a greater feeling in my life than hearing Whitney Houston sing that song for the first time." This is Brown again. I don't think there's a better wish for someone you care about than joy, happiness, and love. Even in 1973, Dolly clearly knew that joy and happiness are two separate emotions. We need both, but how we experience them and how they affect us are different. Joy is sudden, unexpected, short-lasting, and high intensity. It is characterized by a connection with others, or with God, or nature, or the universe. Joy expands our thinking and attention, and it fills us with a sense of freedom and abandon. Happiness is stable, longer-lasting, and normally the result of effort. It's lower in intensity than joy and more self-focused. With happiness, we feel a sense of being in control. Unlike joy, which is more internal, happiness seems more external and circumstantial. Brown, in an earlier book, The Gifts of Imperfection, quotes Anne Robertson, a theologian and writer. She explains that the Greek word for happiness is makarios, which was used to describe the freedom from the rich from normal cares and worries, or to describe a person who received some good fortune, such as money or health. Robertson compares this to the Greek word for joy, which is chairo. Chairo was described by the ancient Greeks as the culmination of being and the good mood of the soul. Robertson writes, "Chairo is something the ancient Greeks tell us that is only found in God and comes with virtue and wisdom. It isn't a beginner's virtue. It comes as the culmination. They say its opposite is not sadness, but fear."
That 1973 song, I Will Always Love You, was a mature breakup song. Also in 1973, a man named Robert Weiss wrote a book called Loneliness, The Experience of Emotional and Social Isolation, in which Weiss defined loneliness as a gnawing, chronic illness without redeeming features. Brown notes that loneliness was equated with shyness, depression, being a loner or antisocial, or possessing bad social skills. Even now, we often use the word loner to describe people, often who have been accused of doing something bad. Who wants to admit to feeling lonely with that kind of framework? Now, we know that being alone is not the same as loneliness, right? We've heard that many times. Solitude can be nourishing when we choose to have some alone time. As an introvert, I certainly need time away from people and responsibilities to recharge. But loneliness is different. Social neuroscientist John Cacioppo and his colleague William Patrick, in their book, Loneliness, Human Nature and the Need for Social Connection in 2008, defined loneliness as perceived social isolation. Brene Brown was moved by their work and says, "We experience loneliness when we feel disconnected. At the heart of loneliness is the absence of meaningful social interaction, an intimate relationship or friendship, family gatherings, or even community or work group connections." Brown, inspired by Cacioppo in her own research, wrote in her book Atlas of the Heart that as members of a social species, we don't derive strength from our rugged individualism, but rather from our collective ability to plan, communicate, and work together. Our neural, hormonal, and genetic makeup support interdependence over independence. Cacioppo explained in his work that to grow into an adulthood for a social species, including humans, is not to become autonomous and solitary. It's to become the one on whom others can depend. Whether we know it or not, our brain and biology have been shaped to favor this outcome. Have you ever felt hungry? Maybe now. Yeah, hunger is just a signal to us that we need something to eat. Have you ever felt thirsty? Sure, most of us have felt thirsty, maybe even right now. Thirst is a signal to us that we need to hydrate ourselves. Have you ever stubbed your toe or jammed your finger and felt pain? Yes, physical pain is a signal to us that we may have tissue or bone or nerve damage. Have you ever felt lonely? I see a few nods, but a lot fewer, because it can still be harder to admit for some of us. But Cacioppo explains, denying you feel lonely makes no more sense than denying you feel hungry. In a meta-analysis of studies on loneliness, researchers Julianne Holt-Lundstad, Timothy B. Smith, and J. Bradley Layton found, living with air pollution increases our odds of dying early by 5%. Living with obesity, 20%. Excessive drinking, 30%. And living with loneliness, it increases our odds of dying early by 45%. In Cacioppo's work, he says loneliness is not just a sad condition, it's a dangerous one. The brains of social species, he says, have evolved to respond to the feeling of being pushed to the social perimeter, being on the outside, by going into self-preservation mode. When we feel isolated, disconnected, and lonely, we try to protect ourselves. In that mode, we want to connect, but our brain is attempting to override connection with self-protection. That means often less empathy, more defensiveness, more numbing, and less sleeping. Unchecked loneliness fuels continued loneliness by keeping us afraid to reach out, he says. Recognizing when we feel lonely ought to inspire us to reach out, to connect with people, and our brains make it hard to do the very thing that we need to do. So it can be helpful to remind ourselves, when we're not feeling lonely, that it is okay that we sometimes feel lonely. And to strategize about what might help us feel more connected the next time we are feeling lonely. But what are those things? In his book, with the rather colorful title, How to Stay Human in an Effed Up World, Mindfulness Practices for Real Life, Tim Desmond wrote on loneliness. He said, "I wish I had a prepackaged solution for this problem, but I don't. However, it seems to me that any solution has to begin with the recognition of the central importance of community in our lives and the willingness to prioritize it over other things. It will have to include making individual choices as well as collective action to resist the larger socioeconomic trends that directly and indirectly oppose community and sociality." Tim Desmond and his wife Annie took a leap of faith, packed up all their belongings, and moved from California to New Hampshire to join their friends in creating an intentional community called Morning Sun Mindfulness Center, part retreat center, part co-housing community. They were often asked why they would do such a thing. When Lynn and I moved here, whenever we told people we were from California and were moving to Schenectady, people asked us the same thing. Why? Even after we moved here, people asked, why on earth would we? We started to worry. What was wrong with this place? What was wrong with this place that they didn't think anyone ought to move here? It was daunting and resulted in us feeling a little lonely at first. How do we connect with people in our new community, in and beyond these walls, who don't seem to actually want to live in it themselves? Now, most of you still live here, so clearly there's something. But loneliness happens. Desmond and his wife don't know whether they'll stay where they are. He acknowledges that living in a community doesn't fix everything. We're still humans. We still feel lonely sometimes. But Desmond notes, the fact is that we're going to need a lot of different solutions to the problem of social isolation if our society is going to recover any sense of community. Some people will be willing to make major life-disrupting changes to find simplicity and connection. However, most people are interested in growing community where they are. So if loneliness is pervasive and certainly dangerous to our living, and building community right where we are can help people feel more connected, then we here at UU Schenectady can play an important role in creating opportunities for deeper connections, decreasing loneliness, and improving the quality of lives for one another and others beyond this circle. I appreciated some reflection questions that Desmond has written. He invites us to explore these 3 questions. 1, if you're overcommitted, can you create more space in your life for connection? 2, are there things you do alone or with your family that could potentially be done in community? 3, do you have emotional blocks to connection and intimacy? It is so easy to get overcommitted. Anybody in this room feel overcommitted sometimes? Yeah, go ahead and raise your hand. It's okay. It's like we're confessing here. There are so many things that draw our attention. For many of us, our lives tend to be quite full of responsibilities, tasks, work, school, parenting, caring for parents, medical and dental work, groceries, chores, errands, meetings, and on and on and on and on. Even many of you in retirement speak to us of how busy you often are. It can be easy to forget to make room for that which nourishes us, connecting. If you are feeling overcommitted, is there one thing you can let go of this next week to make space for you to choose connection? Maybe you already let something go so that you or you and your family could be here today with these wonderful people. This week, Lynn, HB, and I will be going to a retreat center for UU ministers and UU religious education professionals. We will be in connection with others in the St. Lawrence area. Because we too need time of connection and respite and nourishing things. And connecting in community, for some people, seems really easy. Maybe you're one of those people. Maybe everybody is a friend you have yet to meet. You talk easily to people, you get along with lots of people. But others of us need to work at it a little, or a lot. We might feel a little awkward and may need some encouragement or perhaps permission to venture into that vulnerability to talk to somebody we don't know, or to overcome our own brain's loneliness defense mechanism, right? Self-protection mode. Maybe, just maybe, during the social hour after the service today, you could say hello to someone you don't know yet. Because some of you are here for the first time and some of you have been here for 40 or 50 or 100 million years, nobody else knows that necessarily. So just say hi to someone that you don't think you've met yet or don't know very well yet. Or maybe you could ask someone to go out to the back garden or on a walk or have coffee or go out for lunch today or set up a play date for your kids that you've been meaning to do but you just haven't gotten to it because all the kids' schedules are all overscheduled and you're overscheduled and all the things that we talked about earlier. But maybe, just maybe, today or sometime this week, you could create an opportunity to connect with somebody else with no other agenda than that. You can even say Reverend Wendy said we had to, if that helps. Because there are people in this room who are really lonely right now. And there are people in this group, in this room, who aren't feeling lonely right now, but know what it feels like to feel lonely. We can do something about that by willing to be vulnerable. Just ask someone. It's okay if they say no. Just go ask somebody else. There's a bunch of people in this room. There's a bunch of people on Zoom. Or you can go to the welcome table and talk to the lovely people there. They want to connect with you and have meaningful conversations. Or you can come and say hello to Robyn and I, who will be standing right there after the service in our own vulnerability, hoping you'll come say hello. Tell us about your week. Tell us what's on your heart and mind. Though Desmond did ask those 3 questions in his book, he wrote that he doesn't have a lot to say about those first 2. Though as a person whose lectures on psychology, he does have something to say about emotional blocks to connection and intimacy. He writes, "If you recognize there might be a part of you that's holding you back from greater connection and intimacy, the first thing to do is assess whether the people in your life are capable of the kind of intimacy you want. Intimacy always requires vulnerability. In fact, in some ways, they're the same thing," he says. We feel close to someone to the extent that we can be vulnerable with them, which means exposing ourselves to emotional risk. Now, each of you has already done at least one vulnerable thing today. You got yourself to this service. For a brand new person, that can be a very vulnerable thing. Reach up and pat yourselves on the back, metaphorically or literally if you want. I'll pat you on the back virtually over here. Seriously, though, it takes courage to come to a new place, to meet new people. Now, some of you have been here so long that maybe it doesn't feel that vulnerable anymore. But we call Unitarian Universalism a living tradition for a reason. We anticipate that we will grow and change over time, hopefully becoming an even better version of ourselves with some tending. And that may require some vulnerability. Why does that matter? Well, for one, finding community, a place to connect, a place to belong, can really help fend off feelings of isolation and loneliness. But it is not a guarantee. It's just a possibility there, waiting for us to act. Joining a religious community that shares your values, your questions, your struggles can be healing and connective. And a meaningful, lasting relationship doesn't generally just happen. Usually we need to make a bit of effort, to muster up a little courage, to get to know others, to listen to their stories, to be willing to share our own. A little at a time. We don't have to blah all over everybody. It's okay to be mindful about what we share and building up trust and our vulnerability together. Maybe you take a class or join a ministry team or volunteer in some other way, like to play the guitar or sing in the choir. And to engage with one another in a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Being a little vulnerable in the process. Being someone upon whom others can depend. If you have been waiting for a permission to talk to someone, or you've been nervous, you don't really always know what to say, consider this your permission slip. And if it doesn't work out how you hoped with the first person you talked to, just talk to somebody else. Everybody doesn't have to get along. Everybody doesn't have to love each other and like each other and all that things. Just try it. Especially those of you who are saying right now, no way, I'm not going to do that, no way. You especially, try it. I'm an introvert. I know of which I speak. Go ahead and try it. And if you know of someone in your life, maybe it's a neighbor, someone you know well, maybe it's somebody you don't know that well, that you think might possibly be lonely or isolated, consider inviting them to church next week, which means admitting you come to church. Which right now can have some pretty big impact on a very large number of people who don't know a place like this exists and are facing the challenges that are happening in our government and in the wider world and need a place like this. Don't hide the light under the bushel. Tell other people. Invite them here. People need community. We need one another. And many of our brains are in self-protection mode. We are afraid. We are afraid of each other. We're afraid of what's going to happen next. We're afraid about our Social Security checks or whether Medicaid's going to happen or whether our kids are going to be okay. And that little chuckle of recognition, of admitting that we go to church, congregation, society, whatever you want to call this place, that you come to a place that matters. To sit in a circle or on Zoom with people matters. You might be the person who helps move someone from isolation to connection, and maybe even joy, with just an invitation. Think of how powerful that is. Brené Brown's work on describing our emotions is powerful in many ways because the wisdom is applicable. She reports from the data of her research that happiness is feeling pleasure, often related to the immediate environment of our current circumstances. And from her experience of parenting, she also notes that what makes children happy in the moment is not always what leads them to developing deeper joy, grounded confidence, and meaningful connection. I'm not sure it always leads adults to that either. Whereas based on the research, she finds joy as an intense feeling of deep spiritual connection, pleasure, and appreciation. Can you think of a time when you've experienced joy? That deep spiritual connection, pleasure, appreciation. What were you doing? Who were you with? What was happening in your heart and in your body? Sometimes it can be hard to put into words that experience of joy, as it can be so transcendent. And sometimes it's the word chocolate, friendship, kindness, care, beauty. A few weeks ago, we were attending the Spark Theological Conference. Spring had already arrived in Virginia at that point. I felt like my pores were drinking in the green and the bright, beautiful hues of dogwood and redbuds, much like now, here. I felt vulnerable being there. Some of the smartest, most eloquent people of our faith were attending. And the first evening worship service was really powerful. Lynn and I were humbled to be a very small part of that service. A musical group called Beheld, who's based in the DC area, was there. And every song they sang, every note, each arrangement of voices, with and without piano and percussion, was glorious. I was so into it. Every song was an amazing experience unto itself and just brought us all deeper and deeper into the service. My body moving in the groove, singing along, or quietly present as they held us in their singing. I was most definitely experiencing deep spiritual connection, pleasure, and appreciation. It was deep and profound joy. And I would feel it multiple times as wise ones spoke later in the conference, as our dear friend Leon played stand-up bass out in the backyard of the house we were rented, as several attendees joined in an impromptu protest out in front of the church for the hands-off day. I was drumming to build some energy and for my own joy, and then folks started expressing appreciation for my drumming, which in turn brought me more joy. You never know with drums. Some people like them, some people not so much. And suddenly there was no fear as we stood on that street in Fairfax, Virginia. Just people holding signs and waving, some people beeping their horns and waving back. It was just deeper connection with the participants and with the people who went by. If Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama, sometimes experience being sad and lonely, there ought to be no shame when we experience it too. And like the story we shared earlier, when we sit still and breathe in the quiet, we might notice something beautiful. If we just focus on the thing that is making us sad or mad or overwhelmed, then that is all we see. But if we look around, if we sense around, if we listen around, we will see that joy is everywhere. In the sun and the moon, in the silliness and snuggliness, in hugs and friends. Where else do you find joy? Where does joy find you? If joy feels really far away because there is so much to fear, you are not alone. You're not alone. Many of us are afraid, worried, mad. So start small. Maybe go sit out in your backyard or this backyard and just let the joy pour over you with all the beauty there is. Because as much fear as there is right now, there's also a lot more beauty. There's also a lot more love. There's also a lot more joy. So let us refuse to live in that place of fear. It is what they want. Let us not give them what they want. Let us choose a different path. Let us risk vulnerability to create deeper and authentic connections. Let us risk joy to resist the fear being sown everywhere. Let us cultivate joy far and wide, because the more joy that we share, the more joy we have, and the more joy we have, the more joy we can share, as we heard in our Time for All Ages. The more joy we have, the more joy we can share. May it be so. Amen, and blessed be.